Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Hopefully, Insha Allah, wa alaikum salam, brother Hatim. Hopefully, Insha Allah, this is being shared on the Facebook group as well. I don't know if anybody can confirm for me that this is being shared, because what I'm doing is I'm sharing it from my Facebook Live, from my profile, and then sharing that onto the actual private group. I thought it might be better to get more people involved in the conversation, because not everybody who is on my friends list are in that group, so I thought maybe it's an opportunity for that. I don't know if Abu Muhammad Ali can tell me, inshallah, if it is being shared on the Facebook Live, Facebook group as well. Wa alaikum assalam. Is it on the evidence group? Yes. Oh, excellent. Alhamdulillah. Excellent. So that's good. Thank you as well, Muhammad Bilal Yahya. Wa alaikum salam. Wa alaikum salam to Muhammad Amr as well. So excellent. So we released last week the videos related to session 2. Session 2 was on the positive arguments for belief in the Creator, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically. So the first session was really about how do we approach the question regards to our belief, and the second question was regards to the evidences for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think there was 5 videos. We went through the Quranic approach towards the rational proofs. We then looked at the discussion of contingency and the rational arguments for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the third video we gave further arguments for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. Another argument around contingency, but from a different angle from the second video. Then we gave a argument from language, and we said that the fact that we are able to speak and our language is taught to us, then that means that the first human being to learn language could not have innately learnt it themselves by themselves, just through experience. It had to be taught, so therefore it requires some intelligence to have taught him, i.e. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the fifth video was on how do we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a will, i.e. it's not just some force, this necessary independent eternal being is some force out there, but rather has a will and intended to create the universe. And also, how do we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is singular, one and only, and not like some people try and claim that you can have potentially multiple creators and multiple gods out there. So this is the opportunity now for brothers, people, audience members to ask questions related to those 5 videos from second session. And even if, to be honest, even if you've got questions to the first one, the first session, we can take them as well. So this is an opportunity. I want to just try and dive in there as well in terms of the Q&As. If you haven't watched the videos, then please watch the videos, but you can still stay. Inshallah, hopefully there's some benefit as well, even if you haven't watched the videos, to listen to here. So to go into the first question, so Abu Muhammad Ali, he's asked the question, what is the definition of a necessary being? Right. So firstly, let's look at what do we mean by being. Yeah. Being basically means something that exists. Yeah. Something that exists. Now, something that exists could either has to exist by its very nature, or it could be a possible existence. So what do we mean by possible existence? We mean something that doesn't have to exist. Yeah. Or could exist in another way, or has certain limits to its, to its being, or has certain attributes. So all of these things we would call possible, or also what we called contingent. So we talked about contingency, and we said contingency is something that began to exist, has attributes, specific attributes that didn't have to be that way, could have been another way, has certain limitations that could be limited in another way as opposed to that way. And also we said that it could be rearranged in another fashion as well. It didn't have to be in that form. And we gave the example of the table and chairs which were made out of wood. And we said that just because you've got wood doesn't necessarily mean you have a table. So the fact that you have wood yeah, and or the fact that you have a table and it's made out of wood means that if you didn't have wood, you wouldn't have a table. But the reason why we identify that there is a cause or a creator or a designer or somebody produced a table is because we know that wood has a number of possible forms. So it could be a chair, it could be a spoon, it could be a wooden plate, it could be a wooden table. The fact that it's a wooden table as opposed to any other possible form identifies for us something other than wood, and something other than a table must have caused it, and that's what we call the contingent. Now, necessary beings are those things that exist, but they exist by necessity. They have to exist in the way that they do. Yeah. So, as an example of this, we mentioned about the triangle. So we say a triangle by necessity has to have three sides. Yeah, you can't have a four-sided triangle. If that breaks its definition of what a triangle is. So by necessity, it must have three sides. When we talk about a necessary being, when we term this and we apply this to the existence of the creator, what we're saying is that there must be, by necessity, a being that's eternal in order to explain the existence of limited, needy, contingent, finite beings, i.e. the existence of the universe, which is limited and dependent and requires something other than itself. And we said we cannot have an infinite chain of events, and infinite regress is impossible. So therefore there must be something that's independent, i.e. a necessary being. That couldn't be any other way. That doesn't have attributes which could be other types of attributes. It couldn't be, any rearranged in another way. It's not has limits like we understand limits within our universe. Yeah, it doesn't have. It's not quantifiable in size or shape or charge or energy. So therefore, we talk about necessary being as a creator who must exist because his existence, subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence, explains to us the existence of limited contingent beings. So this is what we explained in the video. This was video number 2, and this is what we mean by a necessary being. Hopefully, inshallah, that's answered that question. If brothers still want to ask further questions on that, we can go into that, inshallah. Just get another question out. Ziad has asked a question. Salams, why is that the rational method does not suffer from the problem of induction, given that is still limited amount of sensation? Oh, great question from Ziad. Right, okay, so why is it a rational method? Firstly, very, very briefly, even a empirical method, empiricism, based upon a limited set of data, and we come to a certain conclusion, is still rational. So that's not irrational. But as you pointed out, it is inductive. It's inductive because we've only got a limited set of data, and if based upon a limited set of data, we come to a generalized conclusion, then we can say, yeah, that's an inductive method, inductive approach regards to that, which means we have generalized from the particular, yeah? But when we talked about the universe and we talked about the existence and what we sense within the universe, these types of things, we're not actually doing this from an empirical approach. Yes, we are sensing, but what we are sensing is that limited things require us to ask the question, what causes them? That question of what causes them is not built upon experience. It's a component of rational thinking, yeah? So asking the question, why does something exist the way it does when it didn't have to exist, is a rational question to ask. It is part of our rational capacity. It's why we think. We think in this way. If we take this component out of thinking, then we wouldn't be able to generate thoughts about anything around us. So as a result, when we look at the universe and we say things that are limited, require some explanation for its existence, or it's dependent upon something else, or something has caused it to exist, whatever terms we want to use with regards to this, and I'm using these terms relatively loosely, then the reason why we're saying this is because it could have been another way. Yeah, so as an example, I gave the example of a red triangle. It has to be three sides, but it doesn't have to be red. It could be blue, it could be black, it could be a number of possible colors. Then something other than it being a triangle must have caused it to be that color, because being a triangle doesn't determine it to be red or green or black or any other color. So it's not a problem of induction. We're not inducing based upon our experience. What we're saying is that asking the question is a necessary question upon contingent beings. We have to ask this question. If we stop asking this question, what is the reason or explanation behind a possible being, then we break rational thinking as well as also breaking scientific thought. Hopefully, Ziad, that's answered that question, inshallah. Can you please, so Abdullah Ahmed has said, so I've got a drink here, so I'm just going to, just in case, brothers and sisters, if it appeared that I drank from my left hand, that's the video that's caused it, yeah, just to remove any shubha from me. Okay, so Abdullah has asked, can you please elaborate more on how things can't come from nothing? Okay, to be honest, it's the same answer that I gave before. If something is a possible being, it requires an explanation. If we say something that is a possible being does not require an explanation, that means that all possible beings don't require an explanation. That means that we cannot even determine our thought process to be true. We can't even make any rational judgments upon anything. Because as soon as we accept something can come from nothing, which is a possible being, then anything can possibly happen at any moment in time. And so therefore, you can't make rational judgment. You can't even determine and comprehend even what I'm saying. Yeah, because we use the principles of causality and we use the principles of, previous information in order to interpret what we're saying. And so as a result, we will definitely need to ask this question, that because there is a possible being, there is an explanation, or we require an explanation. For that explanation, therefore, it is either going to be another possible being, which then results in an infinite regress, or it's upon a unlimited, independent being, i.e. a necessary being, i.e. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we say things can't come from nothing, we're not saying this from a point of view of, again, experience. We're not saying because we've experienced something coming from nothing, because we haven't experienced that something always comes from something else, therefore the universe, which has a beginning, must have come from something else. That's not our argument. Our argument is that rational thinking requires us to ask the question, what is the explanation behind contingent possible realities or contingent possible beings, things that didn't have to exist the way they did? So what's the explanation? That's part of the rational method. It's a component of the rational thinking. And because it's a component of the rational thinking, if that's what we've identified, then we have identified that we are valid in asking the question, where did the universe come from if it came, if it was in a position of non-existence, or if it had specific attributes but could have been in other attributes. So we'd ask this question. Hopefully, inshallah, that's clear to Abdullah. If not, please ask again. Right, Ahmed is asking, let me see now, I can't open the, anyway, didn't the Jahmiyyah, others use the same argument of necessary being to eventually describe Allah, in that it's, I can't open the full question, sorry about that, but I think I understand what you're trying to ask. I think, Ahmed, you have to, I sort of sense that maybe, I'm not sure, that you've not watched the videos from the course that we're running. If you haven't, please sign up to the private Facebook group, and then you can have a look at that. We discussed, I think even last week, and there was a brother asked a question as well about, do the classical scholars talk about the existence of the Creator and use rational arguments? We gave a quote in the very first introductory video as well, in fact, by Ibn al-Jawzi, rahimahullah, who's a famous, I think, Hanbali scholar. And he talked about how there are good rational reasons for the existence of the Creator. Imam Ghazali, he mentions various arguments for the existence of the Creator, and talks about this idea of necessary being, wajib al-wujud, the necessary being, Imam Juwayni also mentions it in his book Al-Irshad. Ibn Hazm discusses this point about the finitude or the limited nature of the universe, how the universe has a beginning. Al-Fisal, he discusses it in that book. So this is something that's grounded within Islamic scholarship. I think maybe where the concern would be, and we've also addressed this to a certain extent, is when we try to go from what we sense and what we comprehend as in there's an existence of a singular creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then trying to use the mind to try to understand the nature of the creator. And I think that's where the problems with a lot of these various sects they came from, which is that they were using the mind in order to go beyond what the mind can determine. So they would start to ask questions: is the attribute separate from the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is it different from the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And so there was all these big theological debates about the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is something that we cannot do, and rather we have to submit to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says within the text. And these types of questions, we can't answer these questions because it's beyond our mind, and it's not necessary for us to answer these questions anyway. Once we've established that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists and that the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we accept that and we follow the revelation. So hopefully that's answered that question to Ahmed ibn Osama. Right. Okay, in the argument of infinite regression, I can't understand how we can rationally deduce that an uncaused cause has to be... You know what is? I find it really struggling to open up the full question. I don't know why. Oh, here we go. Excellent. Right. So, I can't understand how we can rationally deduce that an uncaused cause has to be the creator of the universe, since out of the universe, i.e. out of these known conditions of space and time, we can't use logic and mind to deduce anything, since logic and mind apply only to the universe within anonymous conditions out of space and time. The human mind and rational cannot be applied. I'm sorry, this is a point of... but I can't rationally skip it. Sorry, I don't know the name in English. Okay, so it's a good question. I think firstly we have to ask the question, okay, when people make this point about we cannot deduce what occurs outside of the universe, and isn't this what we're doing? Because we're following rules within this universe. Now, this presupposes that the rules that we're following are based upon empirical study. So they're based upon experience. So when we look at the issue of an infinite regression, we gave an argument. We said we can't have an infinite regress. We said, and we gave various examples, or there are various examples out there. One of the examples that I gave was that there is a domino that falls over, but before the domino falls over, the last domino has to be hit by the domino before it, and then that domino has to be hit by the domino before that, and that domino has to be hit by the domino before that. And if there's an infinite number of dominoes, then none of the dominoes would fall over. Yeah. So that was the basic argument about infinite regress. So in order for, and obviously the last domino has to wait for an infinite amount of time, or an infinite number of dominoes to fall. And because it's infinite, i.e. there's no beginning, then none of the dominoes are going to fall over. So hopefully that's clear in terms of the analogy. Now, that analogy, it's just an analogy, it's not based upon experience. So I've not experienced an infinite regression not existing. Or I'm not saying that the reason why I don't believe in infinite regression is because, we've never experienced an infinite regress. I'm saying it's logically impossible for an infinite regress to exist. So it means it transcends the discussion of experience. So it transcends the discussion in regards to what we see in this universe. So when people argue and say, well, how do I know that, certain logical laws or definitions exist outside the universe? Aren't they just contingent upon the universe? Well, logic isn't contingent upon the universe if we understand. But when we're talking about logic in the context of something that transcends, it's a metaphysical concepts or metaphysical principles that we're applying, and understanding. So it's not something that we've developed because we've experienced the universe and then we've developed a logic. Yeah, so it's really important to understand this point. We don't say we've experienced some of these things, therefore. Rather, these are from the definitions of the terms. And based upon the definitions of the terms, we then say it's logically impossible, which transcends our experience. So irrespective of experience now, I don't have to say I don't believe in infinite regression unless I experience something in the future. I know it's impossible to experience it in the future because that concept of an infinite regression is impossible, logically impossible. Like I said, it's like saying, could there be married bachelors outside of this universe? Yeah, well, it's impossible. It's not because I've not experienced yet a married bachelor. It's because it's in the very definitions of the terms married and bachelor that you can't have logically a married bachelor. So whether I'm in this universe, I'm in an alternate universe, whatever it is, that definition, if it remains true, and this is how we understand the language, then that means it's impossible to exist, a married bachelor. Yeah, so it transcends. So this is, I hope, Insha Allah, that's answered that question. I can go back to that again if somebody wants to ask it as well. Right, there's another question. Okay, excellent. Question on language as proof of God's existence. Why the language couldn't be taught by advanced aliens or intelligence rather than a creator? Well, okay, let's say, argument's sake, let's just argue for argument's sake that the first human being learnt language from an alien. Well, we'd still ask the question, where did the alien learn its language from? Yeah, and so we'd still fall into this infinite regress, and we'd have to have a start point by which the language was first taught. So this this idea about could there be an intelligence out there within the universe which is limited, finite, dependent, therefore contingent being that caused us to have life on this earth or whatever. Well, that thing is still limited, finite and contingent, and if it's limited, finite and contingent, it requires an explanation and therefore a cause, and therefore you're still ultimately going back to the existence of a necessary, independent, unlimited being, i.e. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right. Okay. Ahmed, who asked the question before about are we not using Jahmiya arguments, has said, as a result, the Salaf condemned Kalam, and people use the arguments and those imported into Islam by the likes of Aristotle and others, which has no basis from this deen. Yeah, look, so firstly, we need to, we have to unpack a lot of these things. I think there was a quote that a brother recently put up on a Facebook post on the Islam, Science and Philosophy, where he quoted Imam Shafi'i, in which Imam Shafi'i condemned the Ahl al-Kalam, yeah, the people of Kalam, yeah. And I made the point and I said, look, whenever you look at a quote from a scholar, it's really important, yeah, it's something we all have to learn. You have to understand the context, you have to read around, you have to read all of his works before you can make a judgment upon that particular quote. I think we're all, to a certain extent, fall into the trap where we look for a snippet of a quote that proves our point. But rather, what you have to do is you have to be aware of the text of that scholar. If you're not aware of the text and the understandings and the ideas and what they've written about, then what can then happen is that we can understand it incorrectly. Or what we do is we superimpose our own understanding upon that, upon what they've said. Yeah, which is very, very dangerous because you're actually taking it away from the intended meaning of the scholars of the Salaf or the scholars of the past, regards to that. So, during the time of Imam Shafi'i, for example, the people of Kalam he's referring to are the people who are called the Mu'tazila. Yeah, they were the Mu'tazila, and we'll discuss that. So, and just as a quick side point as well, when I mentioned as well in that answer, and this, when this brother posted the quote of Imam Shafi'i, I gave the example of Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal. And during Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal, or one of his statements, which is a well-known statement, he said that I prefer the weak, the da'if hadith, yeah, the weak hadith over qiyas, yeah, over analogy. And qiyas has certain rules, and it's based upon the text as well. You look for an implicit illah or an explicit illah, divine reasoning, and you derive further rulings from it. So he said, I prefer a weak hadith than using qiyas. Now, if I don't understand regards to this, then I could fall into the trap of thinking that he was affirming the following of weak hadith in ahkam, yeah, making something farad and haram. What if you understand the context, you would understand that during Imam Ahmed's time, there was only three categories of hadith. There was sahih, there was da'if, and there was mawdu'. Yeah, there was the trustworthy, there was the weak, and there was the fabricated. Now, if anybody who studied ulum al-hadith, yeah, science of hadith, will know generally there's a fourth category of hadith called hasan, yeah, good hadith. Now, hasan narrations are normally narrations, or during the time Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal was subsumed under the category of da'if. So what the scholars understood what Imam Ahmad meant when he said, I prefer da'if hadith over qiyas, he's referring to, he prefers what we would now call the hasan narration over qiyas, yeah? So we have to be really careful that when we look at quotes of scholars, we understand it from what they intended, not what we intended. And to understand it from their intent, you have to understand the text of what they wrote, what they have said thoroughly. You need to understand the context of the environment that they're talking about. And so when they criticized the Mu'tazila or the Ahl al-Kalam, they were criticizing a particular group of people called the Mu'tazila. They weren't criticizing the use of the mind to come to conclusions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. As we mentioned in Surah Ali Imran, yeah, chapter 3, verse 190, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs us to use our mind, yeah, to come by reflecting upon the creations of the heavens and the earth, the alternations of the night and the day. These are signs for people of understanding, people of sound mind. As Ibn Kathir mentions, he said this means the people of sound mind. So we can use our mind to come to the signs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. I don't think that's a controversial point. The controversy is when the Mu'tazila started to debate about things like the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, as an example, they would say that the attributes of Allah are part of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's essence, yeah? Or they would argue that the speech of Allah is a creation of Allah, yeah? Things like this. So, you know, there's a long discussion about the mutakallimun, yeah, the scholastics, and generally I disagree with their methodology anyway, because I don't believe what we're doing is a methodology of the scholastics in terms of using syllogistic forms in order to come to certain conclusions, or trying to determine matters related to the ghaib, the unseen, yeah, from our mind. So we're not doing that. We're just simply coming to the conclusion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, yeah, and then later on there will be the evidences for the Quran, that the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then we say we submit to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought. So Anas has asked the question, it's a good question. So is God the only necessary being that exists? So again, when we talk about necessary beings, we're talking about, so it's a term that we use. So we're talking about things that cannot be any other way. So we talk about 2 + 2 = 4 by necessity, yeah, or triangle has 3 sides by necessity. But obviously in this context, when we talk about the existence of, of the explanations of the limited things around us, that they have beginnings to their creation, that they could be in other ways, then the only necessary being that can explain this is obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't come with these arguments. So Ahmed's come back. Yep. The deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't come with these arguments. That is, only some people understand it. The rest are oblivious to all these unknown terminologies and don't understand these arguments. It's a good look. The reason why I've gone back to this question, the brother, is because I mean it's good points. So, firstly, understanding belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is intuitive. Yeah? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to reflect upon the universe. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the example of Ibrahim alayhi salam, how he reflected upon the rising and the setting of the star, the moon, and then the sun, and then came to the conclusion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that governs it and sustains it. Yeah? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us very good arguments which are intuitive, natural, which we grasp in our mind, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, and by reflecting deeply upon the reality. So this is the nature. But so you don't need to have complex language and complex argumentation. I agree with you upon that. Yeah, you don't need to have that. However, we live in a time where people are going away from that natural, innate, intuitive nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists and start to bring some arguments against it. Now we have to go into some technicalities. So if they start talking about quantum mechanics and how quantum mechanics on a quantum level does a causality, how things don't have a cause, then we have to start discussing a little bit about this, yeah, for those people. So for me, whenever I discuss this, whether it's with, ordinary average Muslims, I'm going to take the very basic arguments first. Look at the complexity of the universe. Look at how everything within the universe has a beginning, or has certain attributes but not other attributes. That these things are not governed. They don't govern themselves. They are governed by something else. It is natural and intuitive that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that there is a creator that governs these things. So, yeah, you're right. We don't need to know these terminologies per se, but we need to understand the arguments, isn't it? We need to understand, the general, intuitive, rational arguments about really deeply reflecting upon the reality and coming to the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the first thing. The second thing is this. When we look at the discussion about, the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions, I think it's at verse 23, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if you are in doubt about what we revealed to our slave, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then bring a surah like it, if you are truthful. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't explain to us what it means to bring a surah like it. It was implicitly known by the Arabs at that time. Later scholars, then started to look at the discussion around ilm al-balagha, the science of rhetoric. So this term ilm al-balagha was not used by the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It wasn't used by the Sahaba, because they knew implicitly. So then the scholars subdivided ilm al-balagha into 3 further sub-sciences: ilm al-ma'ani, ilm al-badi, ilm al-bayan. So the science of meaning, the science of embellishing or rhetorical devices, and the science of expression. So these terms were then used in order to codify, make it clear exactly what the challenge was. So by reflecting upon what the Quran is telling us, I'd produce a surah like it, then these scholars were able to elaborate a very clear, objective analysis of how things within the poetry at that time did not reach the level of the Quran al-Kareem. Similarly, when we talk about al-Bihar, and we talk about the 16 different forms of poetry, these weren't they weren't explicitly stated by the Quraysh or by the Arabs at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. That was later on. One brother, he mentioned it was one of the famous grammarians, I think Imam Sibawahi, but I could be wrong, who actually categorized the 16 different forms of poetic meter. So Islam's filled with that. The scholars later on, they started to develop terminologies in order to clarify and codify and make it precise exactly what they meant. Even things like usul al-fiqh, isnad, matan, sahih, hasan, aziz, mashhur, ahad, all of these things were not used. They were later on codified by the scholars. And whenever you now want to learn hadith, you need to know, ulum al-hadith, and you need to know the terminologies in hadith as well. Time of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, they never used that, but it doesn't mean that they didn't know it. They knew it implicitly, but later scholars made it explicit. Right, okay. Mustahsin wants to ask a question. You can ask a question, just ask it. Right, okay, so what's his question? Why can't a random process generator make things? For example, you say, why this possibility, not that? Why can't it be random? Well, there's no such thing as randomness. There is no such thing as random. There's no such thing as even chance. From an empirical point of view, so from an experiential point of view, what we experience, there's no such thing as random, or chance. Everything follows laws. Everything follows regulations. So even this concept of randomness doesn't exist in the reality. There's nothing random within the reality. For example, if I toss a coin, and you say, well, it's 50-50, it's random. Well, it's not random, because if I could measure the strength of my, force that I put to toss the coin, if I knew the wind resistance, if I knew the gravitational force, I knew the weight, I knew all the variables related to the coin, I would be able to predict what side it would land upon. There is going to be a very clear explanation as to and the laws and the regulations that it follows. We call it random, but it's not really random. There's nothing really random. Even, random number generators are not even random. They follow an algorithm, in regards to how they produce random numbers as well. So they're following algorithms, following various laws. So, this point about, well, couldn't there just be something random then, okay, we know that within the universe there is nothing random. Couldn't there be something outside there that's just random? We got two problems with this. The first problem is, okay, let's take the position that there could be something random, and that outside the universe it's pure random. Yeah, it's pure chaos. There are no rules, no laws, nothing. Anything can happen at any moment, at any time, for any given reasons. Yeah, but then we still have to ask the question: why does this universe follow certain laws and regulations? Yeah, why isn't this universe, which is a product of the cosmos outside of the universe, which is completely random, why does it suddenly we have fixed patterns, fixed nature, fixed laws that exist within this universe where we can talk about causality and we can operate and we can build rational thought? Why does it exist within this universe? What is the relationship between pure randomness and order? Yeah. So you still need something to give an explanation. If the explanation isn't in this so-called outside the universe random cosmos, then the explanation has to exist, and it's not going to be explained within the universe, because the universe is a product of that pure randomness. Then the question then becomes, well, what's that thing that caused it, yeah, to become to follow those fixed laws and fixed rules and fixed nature? And that obviously means that that explanation of pure randomness outside the universe is not an explanation of why we see order and we see laws and we see things following causal principles, etc. within the universe. So therefore it requires an explanation. That explanation requires something other than random, which is not an explanation, and therefore it requires an intelligent, independent being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The other thing is obviously as soon as we accept one process to be random, something that's acausal, which is contingent, by the way. So something which is contingent, something doesn't have to be, yeah? If it could be just that way for no reason whatsoever, then that means that anything is possible at any moment in time, yeah? For example, there could be an elephant that jumps out behind me, yeah? And that's not going to happen. So, by accepting that principle, we accept there's nothing fixed ever, yeah, and we'd have to follow our life according to that, and we don't follow our lives according to that. There's a very basic example. I remember I've given this example many times in some of the debates when people start to bring out these things. Oh, how do we know there's causality? And on a quantum level, there's no causality, and this and supposedly anyway. And I said, look, when you walk crossing the road and you see a van coming towards you, driving towards you, are you going to stand there and sit and ponder whether, based upon the wave particle duality, that the van could just pass straight through you? Yeah, you're not. You're going to get out of the way because you follow your principles in that way. And if you're following your principles in that way, why is it suddenly we abandon it? Yeah, we suddenly say, oh no, when it comes to the existence of the Creator, suddenly all the principles that we follow, we base our living and dying by, our health and, living life matters. Suddenly we abandon that when it comes to the existence of the Creator. It shows us actually we're trying to go away from the existence of the Creator and not really, and not being sincere. Yeah, nobody lives their life like this. Yeah, so firstly, contingent beings need an explanation. That's a rational point. That's built upon the rational component of thought. Secondly, we still need an explanation of why this universe follows laws, even if we say outside the universe is random. And thirdly, we don't follow our life like this. Yeah, we don't. If it's sufficient for us to make life and death decisions, it should be sufficient for us, to come to the conclusion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists through this methodology as well. Mustahsin said Ibn Taymiyyah agreed with the contingency argument as well. Okay, that's very good, mashallah. So Abu Muhammad Ali, how does rationality necessitate truth? So I'm trying to understand if I understand your specific question. I think two ways of looking at this, or a couple of ways of looking at this. The first way is when we talk about when we talk about issue of rationality, and just like I mentioned, it's rational to get out of the way of the van. and we accept that and we live our life according to that, then using that same methodology of thinking, if we look at any of the rest of the universe and we come to the conclusion of that there is a creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we need to follow and submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that should be sufficient for us. I find it, sometimes I find it really odd when you come across some people or atheists who say, no, we can't know anything in the universe. We just don't know anything, yeah? And they try to be really, really skeptical, and they try to really deny the very basic truths, that their rational mind comes to. When you start applying it to the existence of the creator, they start to become like this. And then when you start to give very practical examples, you suddenly realize they don't really believe that. So they don't follow it in their own heart, yeah? They follow rational processes of thinking and determine truths based upon those rational processes. When you identify it for them, then they accept that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that obviously we as Muslims, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us previous information. We've already accepted that previous information is a necessary component of thought, of thinking. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us rational information, previous information. Why do we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us previous information? Because we know that just by sensing the reality, we cannot know and understand things around us. We can't even develop language. We said that in session 1 and we discussed that. So, if you want to go back to session 1, have a look at that. Look at the argument from language as well. Talks about that as well. So we need to have previous information. Previous information is either going to be something that we are taught from the environment, or it's going to be taught from something other than the people around us. Yeah. So obviously I learned language from, our parents, from school, from the people around us. So that's how we learn. And so each generation learns from the previous generation, but there's going to be one generation or one individual who starts off, and that person therefore can't learn language, can't develop previous information independently. So therefore the previous information, the only explanation is that there is a creator that's given that previous information. So therefore we know and we can trust our rational thinking, because we can trust that ultimately rational thought must have been given to us by our creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For us to have this conversation, for you to understand what I'm saying in the English language, it's because you have previous information about the language, you're able to understand the vocabulary, the grammar, etc. And that's taught to you, and that was taught from a previous generation, maybe from a different language which morphed into this language, but it was still another language that was taught from another language, etc., etc. Ultimately, the only explanation that we have is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us that previous information and therefore allowed us to develop meaning, understanding, comprehension, as well as language as well. And if you remember, we talked about this thing called the Munchausen trilemma. And Munchausen trilemma was this discussion that in philosophy they have, which is where do the definitions and meanings of words come from? Is there, because every word has a definition, so that word can be defined by another word, but then that other word that defines that word has its own definition, so it's defined by another word, and that word has another definition which is defined by another word. So they said, well, there's three problems, or there's three potential explanations for this. Either an infinite regression of meaning and words, secondly, there's a cyclical dependency, or thirdly, there's axiomatic words in language, brute facts. They're things that just we know, and we've explained in video 2 that an infinite regression is impossible. We explained that a cyclical dependency is impossible, so that only leaves us with one explanation, which is axiomatic, which means something had to be just taught to us, and then obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Baqarah, he mentions that Adam alayhi salam was taught the names of things, So therefore the previous information, the terminology, the words ultimately comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who taught it to us. That's how we then develop higher level thought, and therefore rational thinking, and being able to make abstract thought based upon those previous information that was given to Adam alayhi salam, and then the generations after that transmitted the previous information and built upon the previous information. So we have, development of language, etc. How would you reply to this point? Your Iman should not be built on rational arguments, as there will always be counter objections, as Ghazali says. So, when, I think there's probably a couple of things in regards to this. Firstly, there is some truths in regards to having, trying to look for the absolute best argument. The you know, so they'll have one, you know, syllogism, yeah, this form of logical form called syllogism, major premise, minor premise, link between the two and a conclusion. We've got the best syllogism out there. Now, if we're talking about best syllogisms, you know, it's not really about that. You know, the observations and the sensations and the rational process to come to the conclusion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists is not a syllogism. It's not, you know, neatly put in one particular syllogism, as an example, or one particular logical form, but it is rational, yeah? So it's not an argumentation, yeah? We're not arguing for a particular argumentation here, yeah? A particular way of arguing a particular point. This is a concept. This is something that we develop through deep thinking about the universe around us, that we come to a very sure, certain concept, yeah, that therefore a creator exists, yeah. So, you know, there are people out there who are very strong rationally in terms of their understanding and belief in the creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they may not be able to argue the point very well, yeah. And they may not be able to explain some of the arguments greatly, but they're very strong and they're rational, and they have certitude in the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Quran as the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not that they're not rational, maybe it's just the articulation's different. Yeah, so that's the first thing. And secondly is that when you have that solid foundation, that solid rational foundation, yeah, and even, for example, even if people say, yeah, but it's in the fitrah of a human being to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you still have to prove that the fitrah exists within the human being, i.e. the innate desire to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That still has to be proven. Yeah, you have to make that as an objective criteria as well. So even when you establish that and you say, okay, then there's a fitrah and everybody's born with this innate desire and innate feeling that worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's still a thinking process with regards to this. So so we need to go and exercise that thought process and come to that. Where the problem exists is where the discussion becomes highly technical, where the discussion becomes, you have to learn the rules of logic, yeah, so you have to, and then you have to learn terminology like accidents and atoms, and then use that and superimpose that upon your belief set, and then come to a syllogism that then articulates why you believe in a creator. That's not correct, yeah? But a person that turns around and says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, how do you know? Well, look at the universe, yeah? Look at things around us. They have order, they're fixed, they have limitations, they have specific types of attributes, yeah? It's like, for example, if I asked a question, how do I know the wooden table has a maker for it, yeah? Now, you will say, oh, it's just natural. And it is natural and it is rational. But then you get a skeptic that says, no, it just grew like that. Yeah. Then you have to go into a bit more detail. Yeah. And I think this is where we are in our situation, our environment, which is there are people that are out there who try to put doubts in the minds of many Muslims. And so you have to go into a bit more detail in order to get back to that natural, intuitive nature that there is definitely a creator exists. And there are very good arguments and very good explanations for that. So Mustasin has said logic and mathematics is not based on the universe. If the universe were destroyed, logic and mathematics would still remain true. I think that's a good point, and I think that's related to the question that was related about infinite regression as well. And Abu Muhammad Ali said, let the teacher do the teaching. No, it's all right. Alhamdulillah. Right, okay. Is there any other questions? Something being logically impossible doesn't necessarily, it's physically or metaphysically, though. It's a good question. So, sometimes, just really quickly, yeah, I have a can, yeah, and it happens to be Pepsi, and I think to myself, you know what, is it the right thing? Is it Coca-Cola I'm meant to be not drinking, or Pepsi? Which one's, because some people are very particular about, what type of, drink that you're not allowed to have because apparently they're made in Israel or they support the Jews or Zionists or whatever it is. I don't know. So please forgive me. I didn't know. I don't know. So anyway, okay, question. Something logically impossible. Right, okay, so it's a really good question, this. And it's really, really important because people always, they tend to make a mistake in this issue, yeah? And they apply this incorrectly upon the text, actually. And this is, again, people say, ilm al-kalam is really, really bad, etc., etc. But this is actually a part of understanding where the rational mind is used and where it can't be used. So, for example, when when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, or when the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that he went to Isra, the night journey, Isra wa Mi'raj, yeah, some people say, even some Muslims, na'udhu billah, say, I just can't accept that, yeah, and so they reject the hadith based upon their mind because they can't accept it. And the problem here is and then they'll quote, such and such scholar said you can use the mind to disregard or qualify a particular hadith or divert it from its literal meaning, etc. Yeah, but what they don't understand is what they meant. The scholars, when they talked about this in terms of the use of the mind, they're not talking about what's improbable, yeah, or impossible for human beings. They're talking about what's logically impossible. So when we say logically impossible, we're talking about a squared circle, yeah, or a four-sided triangle. That's impossible. So if something comes that says and affirms a logical impossibility, then we say, okay, there's a problem here. And obviously, when we look at the Quran and the Sunnah, the authenticated ones, we don't find anything which is logically impossible. Just like, for example, there's a hadith in which, if one part of the fly falls into your drink, water, and you're meant to dip it in fully and then take it out because one part has a disease and the other part has a cure. Now, my mind might not understand that, yeah, but it's not logically impossible. Yeah, this is the point. So we have to be very clear when we apply this concept of logically impossible and not apply it when it comes to things which are humanly impossible or implausible. Yeah, so this is really important. So some Muslims I've come across, yeah, they claim that the miracles don't exist. Yeah, there are no true miracles. Really, they're just improbable events. And the reason why they say that is because, it goes against the laws of nature. But the laws of nature, one, they're induced, yeah, so it's through inductive reasoning that we came to these conclusions that laws of nature exist. And secondly, they're not logical, it's not logically necessary for the laws of nature to exist the way that they are. They're not necessary beings, they are contingent beings. So therefore, there's nothing logically impossible to say that a mu'jiza, a miraculous event that breaks the known laws of nature, did not occur at that moment in time. Yeah, like Musa alayhi salam parting the sea, yeah, or Isa alayhi salam bringing a dead person back to life. This is part of within the possibilities and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right. Okay. I think there's a few people. The Mu'tazila had good intentions. Yes, Mu'tazila had good intentions, but did not know the limits of the mind. Yeah, just on this point about the Mu'tazila. In session 1, we talked about how there were two general schools of thinking, yeah, if you want to call it epistemology. One was the empiricist, who believed that we didn't have innate knowledge and we just knew things based upon experience. And then there was a second group of people that were known as the rationalists. And the rationalists believed that actually we were born with innate knowledge and we can come to certain conclusions without having to directly experience it or through experience. However, we said that rationalists were split into two groups. The first one said that the mind can answer all questions, yeah, even metaphysical questions like the nature of angels, like the nature of resurrection, like heaven and hell, or the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's one group of rationalists, from the non-Muslims, yeah, and then later on that was imported upon the Muslims. And the second group of rationalists believed that the mind was limited, that we cannot know things outside of the universe, i.e. the essences of things outside of the universe or the nature, even if we can comprehend or apprehend the existence of the Creator, we cannot comprehend Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence. Yeah. So Mu'tazila, sadly, they fell into the first group of rationalists, yeah, or some of them, or many of them within the Mu'tazila, where they started to look at questions about the nature of the metaphysical world, or the ilm al-ghayb, the knowledge of the unseen, and they started to apply rational or they started to apply the human mind in order to answer these questions. So some of them, they started to say that the resurrection is not a bodily resurrection, rather it is some sort of soul that's resurrected, not the actual physical human body. Even though the Quran is very clear, it's the human body that's resurrected, they went away from this. So, and obviously from the, then you had another group of people from Mu'tazila, another extreme group called the philosophers, and the philosophers, really affirmed some really strange things regarding the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and things like that. So the majority of scholars, the Ahlul Sunnah, if we want to call them that, they were the ones that accepted that you can come to the conclusion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, but there are limits to reason. Yeah, and then if something is mentioned in the text and you cannot comprehend it with the mind, then you just simply accept it from the text. Right, okay, somebody's asked a question. Okay, so I have one question, and that is from the Hinduism. So when someone dies, how do we know that person has died and has not been another creature, for example, an ant, or the reincarnation that Hindus are talking about? Secondly, I want to know, how do we know that our creator is the real creator? Okay, so I actually talk about this in the final session, 6th session. Not this particular question, but what I talk about is the filters that we use when it comes to somebody coming to us claiming that they have revelation from God, yeah, or they have the true religion. I said that we have certain filters, because some people, they'll say, oh, there's so many religions out there, how do I know which one's the true religion? Do I have to study every single one? Well, no, you don't have to study every single one, because we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. How do we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists? Because it's mentioned, because rationally we come to the conclusion that limited, finite, dependent beings must have an unlimited, independent creator who's singular, yeah, who's transcendent, beyond the universe, beyond limitations, beyond the creation. So he's a creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to create. So if somebody now comes to me with a claim that a particular religion is true, but they believe in polytheism as an example, or pantheism, then I know that they are false automatically, because they have, affirming more than one gods, or they're making God like human beings, like in maybe Christianity, saying that, Isa alayhi salam is a god as well, yeah. So as a result, I can filter out a lot of different opinions, yeah, and come to a conclusion that there's only maybe a very small number of religions out there that require investigating, because they affirm one absolute creator who's transcendent, beyond the universe, that there is nothing and no one comparable unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, upon this creator. And so therefore I investigate that. Now, how do we know about whether, what happens after life and after death? We can only know that by investigating what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us. We don't know this. We can't determine this. So, I mentioned this in the next session, session 4 and session 5, where we talk about why do we want to look for a messenger. Yeah, in session 4 we have a couple of videos that discusses why we look for a messenger, or a message from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a message from the creator. So, in session 4 we talk about this, and we give various arguments. And one of the arguments that we mention in that, which obviously when you get to that you can watch it, is to say that, look, we don't know what happens to us after we die until the creator tells us. Yeah. So, if the creator says that there is a day of judgment, and there is going to be heaven and hell, and that we need to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to be saved and achieve the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's what we accept, because the creator has informed us. So really, this question about, how do I know, really the question is probably more, how do I know Hinduism's explanation of reincarnation is false, and that Islam's explanation about resurrection, and therefore worshipping the correct creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is true? How do I know this? Is because of the reasons why the Quran is a miracle given to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which we'll discuss in the final session. So if you've not signed up, by the way, please sign up, or go to the Facebook group, It's on my Facebook profile, the group, and then you can watch the videos. And every week we'll be releasing the next section. So the session that's going to come tomorrow, Insha Allah ta'ala, yeah, is going to be upon the contentions against the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What are the arguments people use commonly against the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And then the fourth one, the following week, will be on the need for messengers. And the final one, the fifth one, will be upon the Quran as a word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alright. Returning to the question of infinite regression, I did not talk about the experiencing infinite regression. I mean that logic in itself cannot be applied outside the normal conditions, i.e. space and time we know of this universe. As I said, this is a question of people who doubt of the same existence of things. Here my question implies that I am doubting the existence, here implementation of the intuitive basics of logic and beyond, and the mind beyond the point of creation and space and time and the Big Bang. Right, okay, so let's look at this. Let's break down the question. It says, so when you said here, I meant that logic in itself cannot be applied outside of the normal conditions. Right, okay, we need to ask the first question, why can't logic be applied outside of the normal conditions? Yeah. What people normally will say is because we experience in the normal conditions. Yeah. So I'm saying, well, it's not based upon experience. So therefore, that is there's a hidden assumption in terms of the question that's being asked, that there is an experience that determines logic. So that's first thing. Secondly, he said outside the normal conditions. He talked about, i.e., space and time we know of. Yeah. Again, that implies that logic is applied to space and time. Now, logic is something that's not applied to space and time. So, when we talk about something which is causally related to the effect, we don't necessarily mean cause in the context of it occurs before time and is separate in space. Yeah, that's not necessarily what we mean by cause. We can refer to cause as in a ontological sense, yeah, or a metaphysical sense, i.e. cause being other than its effect, yeah, and it might occur in the same moment in time, it might occur after the effect, so the cause might occur after the effect. For example, sometimes in quantum mechanics, some people have postulated this can occur, or it might occur prior in time. So there's difference in regards to this. So we need to understand and appreciate that when we start talking about logic, we're not talking about logic because we are saying it's confined in space and time. We have to, we have to prove that point. That's a statement that we have to prove firstly. So that the burden of proof is to prove that this is the case. Secondly, is that when we say it that it can't be applied outside the normal conditions as well, then that implies again it's because of experience. But we're saying it's not because of experience. Yeah, that we're coming to the conclusion that an infinite regress is impossible. Thirdly, I think Brother Mustahsin has mentioned the point, which is that even if the universe was destroyed, mathematics would still hold true. 2 + 2 will still equal 4. Yeah, a triangle will still have 3 sides. A bachelor will always remain unmarried. Yeah, these are logically necessary, statements to have. So it's not the case that when we look at this issue of infinite regression, that we are saying infinite regression is something that we've come through experience. No, it's come through the definition, or maybe more specifically, a synthetic proposition that shows the impossibility of an actual infinite or an infinite number of series of events to take place. Yeah, there still needs to be a foundational explanation for it. So, therefore, when we talk about basics of logic and mind, it is still, acceptable to ask the question, irrespective of whether we're talking about within the universe or outside the universe, or within what we've experienced or outside of what we're experienced. So let me give you another example of this. Let's say within the universe, logic exists. Okay, so we still need to ask the question, why does logic exist within the universe? That's the other point that I mentioned. So why does logic exist within the universe? If it's not necessary, that logic should exist within the universe, We still need an explanation for that. So that's first. Secondly is, why are we saying the universe? Have we experienced all of the universe? So how do we know all of the universe experiences logic? Yeah, if we're going to follow this argument, so let's take that same point. When we come across a new phenomena, yeah, something new that we have not discovered, maybe a new star, maybe a quasar, maybe a black hole, or maybe a particular new particle, or the dark matter, whatever it is. Why do we? This is a new experience. Now it could be, as we've already accepted that prior to the experience we still apply causality to it. So we're still going to explain that new thing based upon our experience, based upon these fundamental logical principles, or even causality. So we'll still explain it, this new experience. If we really are sincere, if people are really sincere that causality is something we just experience, then when they come across a new experience, they should not look for a causal explanation. But we always look for a causal explanation. It's not like we don't look for a causal explanation. We always look for a causal explanation. Yeah. So I think in video on science and scientism, I give the example of how scientists discovered this new phenomena, which was the fact that the stars on the edges of galaxies were orbiting the central mass of the galaxy at the same speed or faster than they were expecting, or at the same speed as stars that were closer to the central mass. And they said that breaks the laws of gravity for it to do that. Yeah. So did they therefore say it's just inexplicable? Well, we just don't. That's it. It just happens. No, they already had the principle of causality before experiencing this, and so they applied it and said, okay, maybe there is another form of energy or another form of matter that's exhibiting gravity, and therefore it's allowing for the laws of gravity to still remain fixed, so it's not breaking the laws of gravity. And some of them call this dark matter. So there's dark matter throughout the universe which exhibits gravity and therefore allows for stars on the edges of galaxies to orbit the central mass at the same speed as stars closer to it. So causality is not something we just develop through experience and then think, I've experienced something that's got causality, so therefore it must be caused. That thing is caused. No, it's something which we've already presupposed within the scientific method, is part of the component of rational thinking, and then we apply it upon experience. So it's not experience that makes us come to these logical conclusions. We've already presupposed them, or we've already got them as synthetic propositions which we then apply upon the reality. How is the universe contingent and at the same time it's determined? Okay, so obviously the term contingent and determined needs to maybe unpack. Obviously we've already talked about contingent. Determined is something which some people say it has to be in that particular way. But even when they say something is determined, it has to be in that particular way, they still explain it by another thing. So it's not like they're not explaining it in with recourse to something else. They're still so when it's something they say the reason why water flows is because of the hydrogen bonding. The reason why hydrogen bonding is because of the proton being positive and the electron being negative. The reason why that is because the spin of the electron is in this particular way and not that particular way. Because of this, it's because something else. And say it's deterministic. But a deterministic linear process does not mean that it didn't require something else to determine it. It still required something. It's in the word deterministic. Something's determined it to be that way. So it still requires an explanation for it. We can't have an infinite regress. So therefore, there must be a necessary being that has determined it to be that way. However, when we talk about contingency, we're saying, could we even imagine it to be something else other than it is? Yeah, could it be in another way? Could we imagine it not existing, as an example? Yeah, the universe or the boiling point of water. Could it be something like 110 degrees Celsius, even under room conditions? Yes, it could be. Even through our perception of that thing, it could be that way. Yeah, in terms of the contingent universe, things within the universe. So therefore, the very fact that we can perceive it to be something other than it is at this moment in time, or this moment, gives us the understanding that something must have caused it to be that particular way, whether that's through a deterministic process or determining it at each and every moment. In fact, this is what Imam Ghazali calls the murajjih, al-murajjih, which is the determinant, I who determine the attributes within that thing at that moment. So hopefully that's explained that. So Mustasin said, how does randomness give rise to laws? Yes, good point. Okay, thank you. Well, randomness came into existence. Okay. Why is it impossible for two necessary beings to exist? Okay, so it's the final. So I'm getting pins and needles because I'm kneeling on the floor. Yeah. So if I'm looking in pain, that's the reason why. Yeah. So anyway, why is it impossible to have two necessary beings? Okay, so the final video discusses this point, and we said in the discussion that there's a couple of arguments for this. The first argument is, to say that if you had one necessary, unlimited, independent creator who decides to create, and another one who decides not to create, then whose will supreme or become supreme? And we say that's impossible. Yeah, so therefore the fact that we have existence of contingent beings requires us to have only one necessary being. So that's one argument. And this is, by the way, this is arguments found within the Quran itself. The second argument we said is the fact that the universe has particular laws which are fixed. One set of laws. So boiling pot of water doesn't on one day boil at 100 degrees and the next day boil at 110 and alternates. Yeah, but rather it only boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Everything within the law follows various fixed patterns. So that indicates that there must be a singular creator that has created order within the universe. More than one creator, you would have chaos within the universe. So that's the second argument. The third argument we used was the argument of that if you've got one creator, yeah, and you've got a second necessary independent unlimited creator, then at what point does one creator end and the other creator begin? Yeah, so you have creator A and creator B. So by definition, if you've got limits between the two creators, then you have two distinct beings, and therefore you have two limited beings as well. So they become limited, they limit each other. So therefore there can only be one creator. The other thing obviously is you need to have a way to distinguish them. So having two different entities requires the ability to distinguish them. How are you going to distinguish two different entities if you can't distinguish them by size, by mass, by shape, or by will, or anything like that? So it means that you have to have only one necessary being. It is impossible, logically impossible, to have two necessary beings who created the universe. And obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned okay, so it's a good question by Anas, yeah? He said, for the argument from language, can't the first person that learnt language just have pointed an object and randomly name it as something? This wouldn't require a creator, right? Obviously coming from the first person idea from the atheistic perspective, right? So if you think about it, the concept of language, so the concept that a sound represents a object, that's an idea already that he exists in his mind. So he doesn't have the idea that sound represents objects. If he doesn't even have that idea in his mind, then how could he even come to that conclusion that if I if I look at a sheep and I say sheep, yeah, or look at a cow and say cow, he's already got a preconception of language. Yeah, he's already got language and concepts of that sounds represents objects. Yeah, and so therefore when he goes back and he said, I saw a sheep and a cow to his mate or whatever, he's going to understand what he's saying. So he's got to have that concept before him. That concept has to be given to him. He can't just experience it. He can't just through his own sensation. So language is not something that can be learnt from, just simply, a person left alone and he suddenly derives his own language. It doesn't work like that. It's, logically, if we've established what rational thinking is, and the definition of rational thinking. How do we know what rational thinking is? Well, because we know how we make our rational thoughts. So we sense reality, we link to previous information, and we generate a thought. Yeah, this is how we think. If this is how we think, this is what rational thinking is for us, then it means that rational thinking for everybody is like this, including the first human being. So the first human being must have to have this process. If the first human being has to have the process of both sensing the reality and linking it to previous information, then the first human being had to be taught the previous information, just like we have to be taught previous information from our parents or family around us or the society. Similarly, the first human being must have been taught this. So, sometimes it's really difficult to get our head around. Thinking, well, how do we, can't the first human being just simply, work out thoughts for themselves? But every way we think, is built upon certain axioms or certain concepts, certain previous information. So like I said, making sounds and pointing at something, and therefore, even just pointing, what does that even mean? I'm pointing. How does me extending my index finger mean that I'm identifying that particular thing? Yeah? So that's a concept as well in itself. So everything that we have are concepts, and they're given to us, the previous information. And it's from the previous information that we develop new thoughts, and those new thoughts then become stored in our mind as other previous information. And so language and words and meanings and thoughts can grow in that way. Hopefully that's answered that, Insha Allah. Yes, Akhi, mashallah. I don't know what's happened. I think my camera's flipped. I don't know how to unflip it. Hold on, here we go. Oh, there we go. Alhamdulillah. Alright, alhamdulillah. Yes, Akhi, mashallah. Hope you're well. Alhamdulillah, I'm very well. Fitrah and personal relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best way for me. Yeah, alhamdulillah, man. Fitrah, personal relationship. These arguments for the existence of the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is something that helps us. It's the minimum. I would say it's just the minimum. Yeah. But to build that iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you need to, build that through ibadah, isn't it? Yeah. I think maybe you were answering Mustahsin. But anyway, about the video on language, one may respond by saying that the origin of language could have evolved from a simpler form of communication like grunting, yelling, body language, to what we now have. Okay, but even then, like I said, even if it's grunting, or body language, they are still concepts, So if I turn around and I shrug my shoulders, how does that mean? Shrugging my shoulders mean that I don't know, Or if I point, and extend my index finger, why does that mean that I'm indicating something that it's identifying, within the reality? How does my grunting, how does that define that it is referencing a object? Because there is no logical relationship between a sound and an object, So how does that is the mind that is already understanding the concept of language. So that's the first thing that we said. The second thing, we gave empirical arguments, or very empirical for experience, where children have been left feral. Feral basically means they've been left without human interaction. And if they, if they're left alone, so some of them, left with wolves, and wolves brought them up, or 2-3 years of age, they end up, living in some woods or whatever it is. When they grow up, they don't grow up with a primitive language. They don't grow up with any language. They have to still be taught it. So we have many examples of this. And what's really interesting as well, further to this, is that if children are left isolated from human beings and don't learn language by the age of 7, then they don't learn grammar. They can't construct grammatical sentences, more specifically. Yeah. So even the fact that we can construct grammatical sentences can only be known by learning language. Yeah. Right. Okay. So Hatib's asked, it's a good question, is which is logically impossible analogous to mathematical proof by contradiction? For example, dividing by 0 is considered impossible because such a thing is undefined. I'd have to think about that one, to be honest. The reason why I'd have to think about that is because mathematics are built upon axioms. Axioms are unprovable premises, yeah? If we want to be specific. So axioms there are certain core premises within mathematics, and then based upon those core premises, then we start to operate according to that. So what we could probably say is that if by definition within what we have defined these terms, like for example what we defined 2, what we've defined by addition, what we've defined by equals, so if we define these terms already, and by those definitions we then say 2 plus 2 equals 4, we can then say that 2 plus 2 is logically impossible to equal 5. Yeah, so we can say that if we've accepted the axiom. Specifically about dividing by 0, I'd have to look at that because sometimes mathematics can be a bit counterintuitive sometimes. Can you explain Psalms 83, 1 and 4? No, I can't. So reason can take you, for example, Allah's existence, oneness, some attributes, but not all, true. And you mentioned some of those points. Revelation is needed for the rest. Purpose of life, Islam is true. Quran miracles, the Prophet ﷺ's prophethood, yeah, expansion, etc. Yeah, I agree. Alhamdulillah, So, Quran, the rational thing is not going to take you to everything. You still need to have that revelation. We use rational thinking to come to existence, come to conclusion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. We use rational thinking to come to conclusion that Quran is word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then we submit, isn't it? And by submitting means we submit to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided to us in the Quran and through the prophetic sunnah. Okay, how long have I been going on for, by the way? Abu Muhammad, how long? If you could just write that down. Actually, you know what? Don't write it down because I've got loads of questions to go through. Can someone pass me a link to those wanting to sign up? Yes, we'll pass you a link, inshallah, Isaac, after this finishing, and I will finish it relatively shortly now. Oh, sorry. I've lost all the comments. All right, if you tap it twice, it changes the camera. Okay, so I think I've lost the question. I've lost the comments, so doesn't matter. I think it's best to, inshallah, end it there. If you've still got any more, oh, hold on, I've got some more. I found them again. Pervez is saying salams wa alaikum salam. Mustasin has to go. Yes, we'll end it inshallah soon. Will this live video be saved? Right, yes, inshallah it will be saved. Granted, everything in the universe is contingent, but how do we know the entire universe is contingent? We will. Abu Muhammad, good question. I'm not going to answer it now because the next session, those videos that will be released as part of the third session in the course, addresses this question about the fallacy of composition. So I will save that rather than answering it right here and right now. Finally, brothers asked a question. How could you reconcile the Islamic saying of we hear and we obey and what we are trying to find reasons for belief in actions? Okay, so Murad is good. I'm going to leave it on this. So this is the final question, inshallah. So when we say we hear and we obey, it presupposes that we've accepted the revelation, isn't it? So we have to have good reasons to accept the revelation. We know in the Quran, this is the thing, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to think about the universe, to think about the creations of heavens and the earth, the alternation of the night and the day, that these are signs for people of understanding. Similarly, the Quran also mentions that when the messengers were sent, they were sent bil bayinat, with clear proofs, yeah, and with them the book and the balance, liqawmun nasu bil qist, so that mankind may stand up for justice. So to Hadid verse 25, yeah, chapter 57 verse 25. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He sent messengers, He sent them with evidences, yeah. So all we're doing is looking at the evidences for the Quran and the prophethood of the Prophet ﷺ is true, and part of those evidences is also to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. So these things are not outside of the ability for the mind. When we understand that these things are true and that the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it is we hear and we obey, isn't it? Then we accept whatever the Quran says, and we accept what the Sunnah says in terms of what has been established for us. Why use the universe as a continued existence for God's existence when God exists regardless of the universe exists or not? Okay, I said that the previous one was the last question. I'm going to leave this one as the last question. There was three main arguments that I used for the existence of the Creator. Yeah, one of the arguments is about how we can go through this temporal causation. Yeah, something is limited, finite, dependent, depends upon something else, which is limited, finite, dependent, which is dependent upon something else, limited, finite, dependent. Cannot go on forever. There must be a first cause, or there must be an independent, unlimited Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second argument I used was to say, look, we're not even going to look at the whole of the universe. All we have to do is identify one thing within this universe which is contingent, which requires an explanation for its existence. And we talked about water. Why does water flow? And then we said that one thing requires laws, it has specific laws, has specific attributes. And those laws and attributes could be explained by the science. But those things within the science have further explanations, and those things within the science have further explanations, and so on. And you get this other infinite regress of shifting the explanation, yeah? So water flows because of hydrogen bonding. Hydrogen bonding exists because of, the electronegativity of the oxygen atom. The oxygen atom's electronegativity is because of its protons. Protons is because of, Higgs boson. Higgs boson because of something else. You're shifting the explanation. Science can never provide an explanation fundamental. All it will give us is a mechanistic explanation, an explanation of how things exist, not why they exist. There is no fundamental explanation. That fundamental explanation has to be about something which is not contingent, not limited, and not dependent, yeah? And therefore is unlimited, independent, yeah, and eternal, i.e. the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the only explanation. So just by identifying one contingent thing, we can come to the conclusion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, even without verses limited or contingent. Isn't that inductive? No, it's not inductive reasoning. The reason why it's not inductive reasoning, I'm getting poor reception here, sorry. Any explanation, yeah, within science will only point to something that science can discover. Science can only measure and discover things that are limited, finite, and dependent. Science can't discover something which is independent, unlimited. Yeah. So science will only give us an example that would also require another explanation. So it's not inductive, it's deductive that we come to that from one thing. The science part is just simply explaining why we need, why the fundamental explanation will never be contained within science. It has to be outside. Alhamdulillah. Right, okay, Jazakallah khair. Tomorrow, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, yeah, you'll receive an email. The email will have the links through the Google Drive or through the YouTube links. I'll say to you guys that the next session we'll look at. The session was going to look at a few things. One, what are the arguments again? Oh, multiverse. Is a multiverse an explanation? So we look at that one. Could that multiverse be an argument against this idea of a contingent being requiring explanation? Because there could be an infinite number of universes with infinite number of objects with different attributes. Yeah. Two, about the fallacy of composition. I'm not sure the actual order of this, by the way. The third argument we look at will be the argument about quantum mechanics from an epistemological perspective. Yeah, so we're going to look at that. And the fourth one is going to be upon the problem of evil. And there's a fifth one. What's the fifth one now? Subhanallah, man. There's a fifth one as well. So problem of evil, fallacy of composition, a causality on a quantum level. Oh yeah, you cannot ask the question what occurs before the Big Bang because time did not exist before the Big Bang. We're going to look at these five contentions. These are generally the five main contentions against the belief in the Creator, and we're going to demonstrate how they're incorrect. Bi'idhnillah ta'ala, it'll be clear, and that will come tomorrow. And then following week we'll have another Q&A. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.